What's happening, everybody? Justin, Bridgewater's finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter, and here we are, the 2017 Stanley Cup Finals. We're finally here. It's been a long road to get here, as it always is, and you've got a Stanley Cup Finals matchup that I don't think anyone would have predicted at the beginning of the season. On the one hand, you've got the Pittsburgh Penguins, one of the most injury-decimated teams throughout the entire regular season. It carries over into the playoffs as their starting goaltender gets injured in warm-ups in game one of the first round. They turn back to Marc-Andre Fleury, who turns in a great performance. He struggles a little bit at the beginning of this series. They go back to Matt Murray. As I said, they should not have been afraid to do so. They go back to Matt Murray. He plays out of his mind, and the Penguins are moving on to the Cup Final in dramatic fashion, double overtime in Game 7, and of course, the least likely person ends up playing the hero, as it's Chris Kunitz, who was really starting to, I feel, show his age a little bit in the way that he played, but you put him back on a line with Crosby, and magic happens. The last thing to go on a player is his shot, and Chris Kunitz scores twice, including the series-clinching goal in double overtime. You got to feel for the Ottawa Senators, the last Canadian team that was in the running, that was in it to win the Stanley Cup, and obviously the storyline with Craig Anderson and how well he played, and the struggles that his family and his wife have been going through this season. So you feel for the Ottawa Senators. It was an incredible season. They came just that close. Who knows? Next season they could very easily be back. But there you go. On the one side, your Eastern Conference champion, the Pittsburgh Penguins. On the other side, your Western Conference champion, the Nashville Predators. The only, I believe, and someone can check me on this, the only 16 seed to ever make the Stanley Cup Final, which is just an incredible, incredible feat. And you have a team here that went in, and most people, myself included, expected them to lose in the first round. And instead they go out and sweep a modern-day dynasty in the first round, and they go all the way now to the Cup Final. The season began with the Nashville Predators at the epicenter of probably the biggest hockey story this season, which was the PK Subban trade. Before the season even started, they were right at the epicenter of one of those stories. They go through the season. It doesn't look like they're going to make it, doesn't look like they're going to make it, and they make it, the last team to get in, and they go all the way to the final. And obviously Nashville is basically usurping Detroit at this point for Hockeytown, USA. Just an incredible atmosphere, and that crowd and that noise, and Nashville becoming a hockey town, which is incredible. And that is your Stanley Cup Final. Your defending Stanley Cup champions and the number 16 seed. You can call it David versus Goliath if you want, but I got a bit of a better one for you. I'm dubbing this Stanley Cup Final the Golden Rumble. You've got the gold-colored Penguins and the gold-colored Predators. The Golden Rumble. Hashtag Golden Rumble. Let's just take a pause for a second and talk about how I've been doing with my predictions, as hopefully you've been watching all playoff long. Again, I was only 5-3 in round one, only 2-2 in round two, so we're only kind of treading water here. But I correctly predicted this Stanley Cup Final in the round 3 video. I was 2-0 in round 3, correctly taking Pittsburgh and Nashville. I even had the right total number of games. I just had the wrong series going to Game 7. I honestly thought that Nashville and Anaheim would go to Game 7 with Nashville winning in Game 7. Didn't work out that way. Nashville won in 6. It was the Pittsburgh-Ottawa series that ended up going to 7 games. But hey, I picked the right teams, and that's what matters. So I'm no math whiz, but that does mean that I am 9-5 so far on these playoffs, and I'm pretty happy with that. I've still got a shot to hit double digits, which is that 67%, 2 out of every 3 series calling them right. And that, when you're at that or above, I think you're doing a pretty damn good job trying to predict the world of hockey. And luckily, it looks like we're going to have an incredibly exciting Stanley Cup Final, which will do a great job in distracting you from the incredibly predictable third straight time NBA Final of Cleveland and Golden State. But all right, let's get into this. Let's talk about this series and then drop dime on a prediction at the end. You're even going to get a 2-for-1 prediction in this video, because I'm not only going to predict who's going to win the Cup, but I'm going to predict who's going to win the Conn Smythe too. So once again, your Stanley Cup Final, your Eastern Conference Metropolitan 2 team, the Pittsburgh Penguins, taking on the Western Conference Wild Card 2 Nashville Predators. Of course, at this point, seeding means absolutely nothing. How have the teams done in these playoffs? The Pittsburgh Penguins, 12-7. They've played 19 games, more games than Nashville has played to get to this point, scoring 3.05 goals per game and allowing just 2.32. Pretty good numbers there for the Penguins. Nashville has only played 16 games to get here. They are 12-4 in those 16 games, scoring 2.94 goals per game and only allowing an incredible 1.81. Season series between these two teams, they only played 2 times over the course of the regular season. Season series was tied 1-1, but it is worth noting Nashville outscored Pittsburgh in those 2 games 7-5. Leading the way for Pittsburgh was Scott Wilson and Patrick Hornqvist, who had 3 points apiece in those 2 games. For Nashville, it was Calle Jarnkrok, who put up 3 points in 2 games against Pittsburgh. Top scorer so far in these playoffs for Pittsburgh, obviously, it's the guy that it's been since the first round, and that is Evgeny Malkin. He put up an additional, I believe it was 6 points in that 7-game series against Ottawa. 7 goals, 17 helpers for 24 points. He leads teammate Sidney Crosby by 4 points in the race for playoff scoring. Philip Forsberg has now taken the lead for the Predators, due in no small part to the injury to Ryan Johansson. But Philip Forsberg, 8 goals, 7 helpers for 15 points. He is tied for 8th in playoff scoring. You know what we're about to do here. Home versus away, the staple of my predictions. The series is going to start in Pittsburgh. They have home ice advantage here, so let's start the series in Pittsburgh. The Penguins are 7-3 on home ice so far in these playoffs, and they're outscoring opponents by a clip of 31-18. Pretty good margin there for the Penguins. Nashville, to their credit, not a great road team in the regular season, but they are 5-3 in these playoffs. 3 of their 4 losses in these playoffs coming on the road, but they have outscored opponents in those 8 games 22-16. Let's move the series to Tennessee now, where Nashville has been damn near untouchable on home ice in these playoffs. Their one and only loss at home coming against Anaheim in the last round. Nashville is 7-1 on home ice so far in these playoffs, outscoring opponents by damn near a double-up clip, 25-13. Pittsburgh, to their credit, again, not a great road team in the regular season. They're just above 500 at 5-4 on road ice in these playoffs, only outscoring opponents by a clip of 27-26. For the Pittsburgh Penguins, overall scoring is up just slightly in games that they play away from home. So you take Pittsburgh and put them on road ice. In those games, they have combined for, 53 goals in Pittsburgh's 9 road games, which is 4 more total goals than have been scored in their 10 home games. So the road games, scoring is up for Pittsburgh. Nashville, it's an even split. If you do the math there, it's 38 at home, 38 on the road in terms of total goals scored in their overall games. But the gap of scoring is obviously much, much higher for Nashville when they're on home ice. The gap is plus 12. They've scored 12 more goals than they've allowed on home ice, whereas on the road, they've only scored 6 more goals than they've allowed. So obviously, what that tells me anyway is the games in Nashville are the games that are going to be the higher scoring games. Since it's the Stanley Cup Final and we're not going to be doing this again, it's time to look at X factors, and I grabbed 2 X factors that I see for each team. We'll start with the first X factor for the Pittsburgh Penguins, and that is Matt Murray. Matt Murray is far and away the least fatigued player left in these playoffs. He has only played 1/3 of the minutes that Pekka Rinne has played so far in these playoffs, of course, due to being injured for the first 2 rounds plus, basically. Didn't see any ice time until the middle of the Eastern Conference Final. So he's easily the least fatigued player that's left here, and that is a huge upside for the Penguins to have your goaltender, your last line of defense, probably be the freshest guy on either team. And since Murray has come in, he's been damn near unbeatable. Goals against average of under 2. I think save percentage is in the 940s or the 950s or something like that. So he's been damn near unbeatable since he's come to town. And that's just continuing from last season when he was so good in the playoffs last year. So Matt Murray, and the fact that he is, again, arguably the freshest player in this series, huge upside for the Penguins. The other one, again, Malkin. He just keeps rolling. 6 points in 7 games in the Ottawa series. He is continuing to score. That's a great line they've got there with Kessel. They are really, really firing on all cylinders. But the Penguins, aside from Malkin himself, have an incredible 3 players, and you can probably guess them, 3 players who are averaging at least a point per game in these playoffs. It's Malkin, it's Crosby, and it's Kessel. So it's not just Evgeny Malkin. He is leading the way in terms of point scoring, but it's not just Malkin. 3 players averaging at least a point a game. Going to be tough to contend with. X factors for the Predators. We're going to start with the first one here. Obviously, I feel any success that Nashville is going to find in this series has to be more than just Rinne. Rinne needs to keep playing the way he's playing. I'm not saying that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with, 2.94 goals per game so far in these playoffs. It's damn near 3 goals a game. There's nothing wrong with that offensively. But any success that Nashville has in this series, it's got to be more than just Rinne. It's got to be the defense still doing what they've been doing throughout the first 3 rounds, which is jumping up in the play, contributing offensively, whole team offensive effort, whole team defensive effort. It can't just be Rinne. If these first couple of games are Rinne just standing on his brain, keeping them in it, it's going to be a short series because Nashville needs a lot more than that. And I think one of the biggest X factors here for the Predators, assuming the line combinations for Pittsburgh go the way I think they're going to go, one of their biggest X factors in this series is getting their best offensive weapons out there against the Crosby line. Now look, here's the caveat with this. I'm assuming that they are going to move Crosby back to the line with Jake Gensel and I think Brian Rust. Now, for the latter half of the Ottawa series, Crosby had been playing minutes with Chris Kunitz and Connor Sheary. I think Kunitz and Sheary are going to stay down on that 4th line, but I would expect Crosby to move back up in between Gensel and Rust. Jake Gensel did not score in the Eastern Conference Final after scoring 9 goals in the first 2 rounds. So without Crosby as his centerman, he really slowed down. I think Mike Sullivan is going to want to get Crosby back up on that line to try to kickstart Gensel again. Crosby and Gensel, just those 2 players, are a combined -4 in these playoffs, despite the fact that they've combined for 16 goals and 36 points. That's been the line that has been as close to a defensive liability, I guess, as Pittsburgh has had in these playoffs. This is a game of inches, and that's what Nashville needs to do. Nashville needs to find just the tiniest little opening and try to exploit that as much as they possibly can. They know they're the underdogs in this series. They know that as the defending Cup champions, most people are going to be taking Pittsburgh to win this series. Just as most people took Chicago. Just as most people probably picked against Nashville in the 2nd round. I finally learned my lesson and picked with them in the 3rd round, and they rewarded me for it. But most people, I would think, are going to expect Pittsburgh to win this series. Nashville is going to come in as the underdog. They need to find just the tiniest little weaknesses to try and exploit, and that's one that I think they can do, and do very effectively. Ladies and gentlemen, your 2017 Stanley Cup champions will be the Nashville Predators, the first ever 16 seed to win the Stanley Cup. PK Subban wins the Stanley Cup. Even though Pittsburgh has home ice advantage in this series, it's going to come down to what happens in those games in Nashville. If Nashville can run the table at home, which I think they can, Nashville wins this series. I'm taking the Predators in 6 games to win the Stanley Cup, the first Stanley Cup in franchise history. I like the series to be 1-1 after the first 2 games. I think Nashville, of these 2 teams, Nashville so far in these playoffs, more likely to be the team to steal a road game early. So I like Nashville to do that in either game 1 or 2. Doesn't really matter which one. It's 1-1 after 2 games. Nashville holds serve at home. They win game 3. They win game 4. This is going to be such a tight series. I would not be surprised if all of these are 1-goal games, couple of overtime games. This series is going to be fun. Comes back to Pittsburgh for game 5. Penguins down 3-1 in the series. They win that game to force game 6. It goes back to Nashville, game 6, and the Predators win the Stanley Cup on home ice. The state of Tennessee explodes, and PK Subban lifts the Stanley Cup. That's what I want to see. He deserves it. I wish he was still in Montreal. I love Shea Weber, but I wish we still had PK Subban in Montreal. And he lifts the Stanley Cup, and to a nicer guy, couldn't happen. So, Predators in 6 to win the Stanley Cup. Your Conn Smythe Trophy winner, you can't give it to anybody else but Pekka Rinne. I think he's going to continue to just play out of his mind in this series. Stifle Crosby, stifle Malkin, stifle Kessel. Like, look, they're going to get their points, but I don't think they're going to go crazy on him. And Pekka Rinne is going to hold the fort, and he's the primary reason I would say that they're there, and he's going to win the Conn Smythe. So, Pekka Rinne, your Conn Smythe Trophy winner, and the Nashville Predators win the Stanley Cup. All right, folks, that's going to do it for another year of NHL Stanley Cup playoff predictions from Bridgewater's Finest. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, as you have done, hopefully, in seasons past and all throughout these playoffs. What's your prediction for the Cup final? Who's going to win? How many games? Who's going to win the Conn Smythe? What are your expansion draft thoughts? I've been thinking about the expansion draft, obviously, for quite a long time. I've had to kind of reduce what my plans were originally going to be for the expansion draft, but don't worry, you've got expansion draft content coming, and you've got it coming soon. So what are your predictions for all those things? Let me know in the comments below. That's it for me, Justin, Bridgewater's Finest on YouTube, Blockbuster_guy on Twitter. And for another year, hockey's closed. Enjoy the Cup final, and we'll see you next year.